Thank you for joining us for the first Bridging the Gap meeting of fall 2021. I'm here with Will Smith. Will is a LCSW. He graduated from University of Georgia with his bachelor's in social work in 2010. And then he graduated with his master's in social work from the University of Washington at Seattle 2 years later. He owns Greater Atlanta Family Counseling, and he co-founded the Atlanta Marriage Mediation Clinic. And he is going to be talking to us about couples therapy and the Gottman method. So take it away, Will.
Okay. Thank you, Dave, for having me. And it's good to be here. And Dave told me what you guys are doing, which is, I think, terrific. And they did not have that when I was at UGA, and I wish they did. And so I hope you guys get a chance to do this and to take advantage of this. So I'm here tonight to talk about Gottman marriage therapy. And I have a slideshow that I'm going to try to share the screen here. So again, this is a talk about John Gottman, and he's a really interesting guy. And so here's just a little bit more about me. So like Dave mentioned, I also I own a family practice in Atlanta where we work with basically every type of we consider ourselves to be the family doctors of social workers and therapists. So we see what's called a generalist practice. So we see people with all sorts of different mental health issues and substance issues and things like that. My friend Jillian, Dr. Jillian Blum, and I founded a clinic in late 2019 to focus on what is called collaborative law. And so what that means is that we partner with family attorneys in Atlanta, typically family attorneys, occasionally something like a personal injury attorney, but we focus with primarily in family law. And so what we offer is that if somebody is to approach a divorce attorney and say, we want a divorce, in theory, the attorney is supposed to refer them back to a marriage therapist or to a mediator first, hence the name. So what we try to do is we try to figure out, and very early on in the divorce process, if people want to get married or if they want to try to fix their relationship. And if they have decided that they don't want to get married, we can also help them in various ways throughout the divorce process, which is massively stressful. I don't for a lot of people. I don't know if anybody here has gone through a divorce or not, but it can be overwhelming. So we try to take some of the pressure off. So this is what we do. We also do child custody evaluations. I also do, for individual therapy, I enjoy working on attachment trauma. So Doctors John and Julie Gottman are interesting people in a lot of different ways. John Gottman is, that's John and obviously Julie, and John Gottman is from New York. John Gottman is, one of the things that makes him interesting and is also very noteworthy is that he has a really strong degree in mathematics. He has a master's degree from MIT in what's called psychological mathematics. As we move forward, John Gottman likes numbers. He likes statistics, and that's significant in a few minutes. John Gottman himself has been married 3 times. He's quick to say that. If you ever watch him in his YouTube videos, he will mention that often. This is important. John Gottman is a research psychologist. He is not a therapist. John Gottman is, he doesn't, I don't think he's still involved in this, but when he was doing his thing, John Gottman was probably closer to a scientist than a therapist. He likes numbers. John Gottman wanted to basically try to identify patterns and things like that in marriages. He is basically considered a conscientious observer, meaning that he was not especially interested in if people stay together or if they do not. He was simply trying to identify the behaviors that are consistent in what he would describe as healthy long-term relationships. And then also he was trying to identify behaviors that are present in relationships that end in separation or divorce. He lives in Washington State, Seattle. Dave mentioned the University of Washington earlier. That's where John Gottman did the bulk of his research and teaching with his wife, Julie. And Julie is actually an interesting person as well. Julie is a therapist. Julie is a clinical psychologist. She is the president of the Gottman Institute in Seattle. She did a lot of work in creating interventions to go with John Gottman's research. She has come up with her own articles and books, considered to be the co-creator of Gottman Marriage Therapy. Again, she is the person who will talk about how to actually use these findings and interventions in practice when you watch them. So this is interesting. So I almost want to come back to this picture in a few minutes. The guy hooked up to all the wires, and we'll come back to that. So John Gottman he realized that a lot of people, there was not a lot of evidence in marriage therapy when he was in the 70s. And he told kind of a funny story about he was aware of one marriage therapist who, I mean, he said it was the Wild West, and that people were just kind of all over the place in marriage therapy prior to his research. And he said he was aware of a marriage therapist who would give the two people a foam baseball bat and tell them that they could kind of have at it. You know, so these people would kind of go to town with that, but nothing would really be solved. So he said that there was some crazy stuff going on. So he collected information. One of the things that he had was an apartment in Seattle, Washington, that he called the Love Lab. And the apartment was rigged up with two-way mirrors and cameras. And behind the two-way mirrors, there was usually a team of scientists. He would also have the people, you know, these volunteers who were staying in the Love Lab come to an office, like a therapy office, and he would videotape them talking about a problem. And so he would just watch, like they'll tell you, like he does not, he says, like, look, I just want you guys to basically pretend that I'm not here and I'm just going to observe. And they would videotape it. And after the argument, they would bring in nurses or techs or whatever, and they would draw blood and they would run labs, and they basically were measuring things like adrenaline, cortisol, the stress hormone, things like that. Going back to this picture, what he would also do is he would hook all these people, these volunteers, up to these different types of machines. So he would measure things like heart rate, blood pressure, blood oxygen levels. He even had this thing under his chair, like he would put these things under the chair that he called a jiggleometer, which kind of looks like a level, and it would capture if people were like rocking back and forth in their chair. So he really tried, again, going back to the spirit of numbers, he wanted to quantify things, like he wanted to have things that he could show to people. So he did all sorts of stuff. Anyway, so he followed these people over decades. That's noteworthy because it's hard to do that. I mean, he had probably hundreds or thousands of volunteer couples, and he and his team were able to follow these people over a long period of time. And so, you know, obviously people move and, you know, whatever. And so they track these people for a long time. John Gottman says he feels strongly that he can predict with a 94% accuracy rate what couples are going to get divorced, or what couples are going to, just by watching them. And we'll talk a little bit about how he does that later. Oops. The other thing about John Gottman is that he was mostly in the spirit of identifying behaviors, patterns, things like that. And he says that he has figured out what is objectively healthy marriage behavior. All right, how the Gottman marriage therapy works. So the first step, well, what we do in the first step in the process is we send an assessment that is kind of a heavy psychometric assessment. There's a lot of numbers and things like that. The good news is that the website will analyze the data for you. But so what we do is we email an assessment prior to the people coming in. And in fact, I actually have an assessment that I can send if you guys want to look. It's a blank assessment. It hasn't been filled out, but if you want to see what's on that, we can get you a copy. The way that it works is that somebody calls on the phone, right, and says, we want to schedule a marriage appointment. We talk to them for a little while on the phone, and you know, we try to collect some history, just a little bit about, you know, what's going on and how we can help and things like that. If they actually come in, which, you know, that's a whole nother story, but provided that they come, the format works like this. They come together, so it's this 2-1-1-2. They come together the first time, and we talk with the three of us. After that, they each come individually, and we tell people that is the first and only time that we will ever see you by yourself. And the reason for that is that they really don't, you know, it's really considered a faux pas if there's the perception that there could be some sort of alliance. whether it's real or not. But people sometimes get paranoid about it's 2-on-1 or something like that. So by telling them and being consistent with this idea that like after we meet today, we will not be meeting together anymore, that can help with that. So you meet with them once, one and only time, and then you return together forever. In the first session, there's kind of a lot going on in the first session, and it's my understanding that Dave and I talked about which part of, because there's a lot of stuff, would be good to practice, and I think that the first session is a good starting point for sure, because in the first session, you're as a therapist, you're starting to conceptualize in your mind what are the priorities, right? Like which one? I mean, because people may come to you with all sorts of problems, and their problems may be kind of all over the place. So what we try to do is we try to align the presenting problems to his model, and that helps us kind of figure out where can we start making recommendations about where to start. So there's some stuff that goes with that. In the individual sessions, we also assess for domestic violence. If domestic violence is present, just as a good rule of thumb, domestic violence is considered probably one of the most dangerous situations that you could possibly be involved in. Domestic violence is pretty much regarded as a precursor to murder homicides. So meaning that a lot of murder homicides have a history of domestic violence first. Perpetrators do not like it if domestic violence starts to come out. So a lot of times it's men, and a lot of these people do not like it at all. They really, it can really get messy. So if domestic violence is present, you either need to be a extremely skilled therapist. But even if you were a skilled therapist, you probably would not touch that. Marriage therapy is contraindicated in domestic violence. Definitely, if domestic violence is present, you would pull the plug and move to individual only, or not at all. The third appointment is when we take the information from the assessment, the first appointment, the individual appointments, and so the depending on how you look at it, third or fourth appointment is for feedback. So that's when we start to talk about how are we going to move forward. This is what we find through the different things, and this is how we're going to recommend moving forward. So this is a figure of what is called the sound relationship house, and in Gottman's model, this is really important. So basically, it starts with the foundation and moves up, kind of similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Love maps is kind of a fancy way of saying knowing what's going on with the other, like knowing what he would describe as their inner workings, knowing things like what's stressing them out right now, what have they been thinking about lately, things like that. Fondness and admiration is basically, do you like being around this person? Like, do you guys enjoy being around each other? Do you view your partner in a generally positive way? Turning towards is an interesting concept. Turning towards basically means acknowledging your partner. So like the idea is that if somebody says something across the room and it seems to be kind of even like a, run-of-the-mill, low key kind of thing, the idea is, are you consistently turning towards, so if they say something to you, it's kind of like when a kid walks into the room. If a kid walks into a room, do you just completely ignore them, or do you pay attention to them? So turning towards is consistently exactly what it sounds like, turning towards the person, to making sure that they're being acknowledged and heard and listened to and things like that. Managing conflict is a big category. There's a lot of ways to do it. The Gottmans have their stuff, and there's good stuff here. We actually incorporate a lot of what is called emotionally focused therapy into managing conflict, which is another model that is by a totally different person, but it's very good at managing conflict. These two at the top, shared meaning and making life dreams come true, to me implies a sense of teamwork, like a partnership. And that can mean a lot of things. Like that can mean raising children together, traveling, saving up money to travel together or something like that, or planning a trip together, buying a second house, retirement, whatever. But the idea is that there is something that is being worked on together up here at the top. trust, commitment on the sides. So this is basically where we start looking at what are the problems and where should we start looking at. So, all right, the Four Horsemen. This is an interesting topic. So the Four Horsemen is a reference to the Bible, to the book of Revelation. And in the Bible, the Four Horsemen signal the end of times. And so I guess he took that idea and turned it into a kind of a metaphor for marriage. So in the Bible, the Four Horsemen are war, famine, pestilence, and death. In marriages, it's criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Now, going back to the idea that he can tell with a 94% accuracy rate if people are going to get divorced or not, he's looking at what is called contempt. Contempt is considered the most serious marriage problem. Contempt is a form of resentment, basically. So it can be there's something about this person that just grows to drive you crazy, and you just can't get past it. Or contempt could be some sort of righteous indignation, something like that. But contempt is like basically there's a very deeply rooted dislike about something, and that is that basically people can't get past. And that is considered, and you can measure that in a few different ways. Stonewalling is a reference to emotional dysregulation. So stonewalling can include, I think stonewalling is actually a reference to dissociation, like basically when somebody starts to shut down. Stonewalling can also be people who get basically hysterical. So it can be again like really kind of shutting down and kind of going like this and refusing to listen or whatever, and or it can be people who just fly out the handle, and either way is very stressful. Criticism and defensiveness, those are straightforward, but they almost always go together. So these tend to create cycles, and a lot of these cycles create these other things. So, but he's also quick to note that like probably every relationship has these things present at some point or another. The problem comes if it gets kind of like medical problems, if it festers, if it gets worse and it goes untreated. So he has some stuff on his website more about these things. But what's interesting is that for every one of the Four Horsemen, he has also identified what he calls the antidotes. So the antidotes are criticism is what he calls soft startups or gentle startups. Soft startups are basically exactly what they sound like. They start with a soft tone of voice. And basically with soft starts, again, this is the antidote to criticism. What they're trying to do in large part, I believe, is to take away this idea of ambushing somebody. Because when people feel like they're ambushed, or when if it comes off really strong, like they go straight into the criticism. So soft starts are basically almost like setting an appointment, like a time with your partner to talk about something. So it's not necessarily like catching them totally off guard. It's asking them permission to talk about a problem. If the person says that they don't want to talk about their problem right then, instead of pushing it, you basically set a time to talk about it. That's considered very healthy in marriages. That also prevents some of the other things. The counterparts of soft starts is what's called willingness. So willingness is the other partner actually willing to have that conversation and to talk about that problem when they say they would. Defensiveness, the antidote is what he calls taking responsibility. He basically makes the case that in almost every incident, there's probably something that each person, or I mean, at least the person who did something wrong can take accountability for. Oftentimes, it's both people can take accountability for something. Stonewalling, he calls self-soothing. So if anybody is familiar with DBT, they talk a lot about self-soothing. So self-soothing a lot of times will include things like breathing exercises, the coping skills, the ability to do, exercise, whatever. And then contempt, it's build a culture of love and respect. So that basically means some of the things that he talks about is making a point to focus on positive things. There's this idea where he calls negative sentiment override. Negative sentiment override is like if there's a president that you don't like, and people, no matter what they say, he's never going to say anything, or she's never going to say anything that you like. Like for people that are stuck in negative sentiment override, these people are almost looking for a fight. Like anything that comes out of your mouth is going to be wrong. the general perception of that person is going to be around anger, things like that. So again, that's why it can be such a serious problem. So what he says to do about this is to really focus on positive things. He calls it catch your partner doing something right, lots of compliments. He talks about there's another, there's one more thing that he says about that. But basically, it means that you're focusing on positive things. So you're making an effort to. He also says it's the small things. So like a lot of little interactions go a long way in marriage therapy. So healthy behaviors. One of the things that they talk about in marriage therapy is what is called the 3 A's. So back to this idea of like, where do we start to conceptualize how to address marriage therapy? The 3 A's stand for affairs, addiction, abuse, things like that. So very serious problems that are causing lots of instability in a relationship. The other thing about the other things that can create instability in relationships are things like legal problems, serious financial problems, things like that. So you want to check to see if there's anything that's really making big waves in this relationship, like actively. Again, it's a small thing. So the idea of acknowledging somebody consistently when they come into a room, little things like that. If somebody said something to you, do you give them some sort of acknowledgement? Giving positive, a lot of times giving positive reinforcement for, kind of small everyday things. Pile on the positives, again, more positive to negative interactions, things like that. Love maps, again, love maps mean knowing your partner's inner workings, and soft starts, which again is really important as far as like criticism and conflict management. Willingness goes with that. 5 to 1, 5 positive experiences to every 1 negative experience. That also goes for conflict management. And then the number 1 predictor of a healthy long-term relationship, he says, is accepting influence. Accepting influence means being willing to take your partner's opinions or whatever into account. So if, for example, if I were to go into our room later and tell my wife that I want to quit my job and go to clown college, and she says, well, I don't think, I'm not trying to say that that's a bad idea, but I don't think you should do that right now, something like that. Or she may say, I think it's a really bad idea, I don't want you to do that. And so if I just say, well, I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna do it anyway, that but if you're willing to say, okay, well, maybe you're right, maybe that is not a great idea, that would be considered accepting influence. Also, trying to be a positive influence on your partner is really important. Surprising findings. Conflict, including high conflict, may not be the worst thing in the world. So what that means is that they found that some couples that last for a very long time yell and scream at each other. They can be very passionate. There could be the presence of lots of yelling and screaming or something like that. They found that people were making it forever, and some people anyway were making it for a long time and had gotten used to yelling and screaming at each other. I mean, there's that expression, fighting like an old married couple, something like that. But yeah, so high conflict is, in the spirit of like yelling, screaming is not necessarily, depending on the person's opinion about it, is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. This is an interesting idea. Toxic relationships can basically create PTSD because people, similar to people that are in a soldier constantly expecting an attack, what they find is that it does the same thing to your brain, like the exact same thing. So if you were in a relationship where you were constantly attacking or preparing for an attack, it starts to basically set in. And again, it can release very high levels of cortisol and things like that. It's very bad for your body. Also, it's bad for blood pressure and things like that. All right, in a nutshell, the Four Horsemen, the presence of the Four Horsemen, and especially contempt, are the largest predictors of divorce. You want to also look for like how long have these behaviors been happening, how serious are these problems, mild, moderate, severe, whatever. And again, that can be subjective. It's more on their opinion sometimes than yours. The more people talk about getting divorced, the more likely they are to get divorced, similar to suicide. People that think about suicide and talk about suicide a lot, that kind of thing. paying attention to the language and tone that people, like if you were to say, like, how do you think the marriage is going? And if that can a lot of times give you a big indicator. Oops, well, one get cut off. For marriage therapy to work, they say that three things have to happen. How good are the clients at understanding the problems? How committed are they to improving, or how motivated are they to fix things or change things? And how good are they at changing things? Like, can they actually change these things? So highly motivated people who are good at changing problems have a very high success rate. Low motivated people, or people that just cannot understand the problems or are in denial or something like that, it's not a great recipe. So basically the way that it was explained to me, if both people are committed to wanting to fix a relationship, it has a 75% chance plus. If one person is interested in staying in and the other person is ambivalent or doesn't want to, it's about 50%. And if neither person are interested, neither people are interested, that has very low. So that's another way that you might think about it. So here are some of what they put out. These are his probably most famous books. The Gottman website is very good. They have lots of resources. And I think that is it.
Thank you, Will. That was really informative. So I just wanted to ask a question. So when you were talking about stonewalling, you mentioned that it was when somebody just won't budge, right?
Or becomes hysterical. Stonewalling is like when somebody has basically either shut down or has lost the ability to, do anything constructive.
Okay, got it. I just want to make sure that was clear to everybody. So what I wanted to ask you now is, do you use the Gottman method with everybody that comes for couples therapy, or how do you decide what to use?
So I use it a lot of times in the beginning, and it's not uncommon to use it all the way through, but there are other models of marriage therapy that are also good. I mentioned emotionally focused therapy earlier. Emotional focused therapy is a very good model of therapy, and it's especially good for people that are having really serious communication issues, or emotionally focused therapy talks a lot about cycles and how people get stuck in these cycles and how to get out of them. But so John Gottman stuff was considered the gold standard for a long time. EFT is right up there with it now. EFT and John Gottman are definitely probably the best models of marriage therapy.
Okay. So when well, let me go back for a second. What are some of the typical issues that clients come to you talking about, and are those issues typically the problem? Does that make sense?
So it can depend. So we definitely try to take the client's opinions heavy, or at least I do. I really try to take, again, I think it's a subjective experience. And I think that if something really bothers somebody, again, that could easily fall under the contempt umbrella. And so a lot of times, if you can kind of get that down, that's a very good start. So anyway, we see we see all sorts of stuff for marriage therapy. It's like a never ending. Most of the time it's people that are fighting a lot, or are a lot of times what we hear is somebody will make an appointment and say something like, this is basically a Hail Mary. If this doesn't work, then I don't see how we can possibly, make this work. We've had instances of people who are actively having an affair, like while they're in marriage therapy, like somebody is aware that somebody else has a separate partner and they don't like it. And it's not always as easy as you think for somebody to just walk away from an affair, So that can get really messy. That's a tricky situation. We've had people who have had issues with pretty serious substance abuse issues. We've had, and that has kind of its own dynamic on relationships. I mean, I think we've probably seen it all, honestly, as far as, I mean, but the most common thing I would say is people who uh, are fighting all the time or are just not spending any time together and are miserable or something like that. And we also see, occasionally we'll see people, and this is always music to my ears, somebody will call and make an appointment and say like, there's not really anything wrong. Like we're not necessarily in a bad place, but you know, we want to make sure that we can make this relationship as good as it can be. And that's just, I mean, that's just, you know, especially compared to some of these other people where it can be very high conflict and stressful. So that's great, and that's a really good practice for anybody. You know, like whether there's a problem or not. I mean, once a month marriage therapy can really, really be helpful.
Kind of like maintenance for your car.
Yeah, I mean, or other health issues. I mean, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, people have to do other things for health. I mean, you brush your teeth every day, you know, ideally, and go exercise and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's just a healthy
Well,
practice.
let's go ahead and take the slideshow down so we can see both of us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
Yeah, definitely.
and I wanted to ask you, so when we have a couple coming to us, what are some, I know you mentioned with the Gottmans, they have a website where they fill out the form. What are some other ways that we could go ahead and get like the basic information that we need to start the first session?
So his book is excellent. This has been around. I've had this, you know, on my desk basically for forever. The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. This is actually not only is a really informative, really interesting book. It's also funny, and it's also easy for people to just anybody basically to pick up and read. So it's a really just kind of interesting book in general. So I mean, definitely, this is basically like one of the Bibles of any, I mean, honestly, any marriage therapist, for sure, and possibly any therapist. It's almost a must read for therapists.
Okay. So when that couple comes in, like how does that walk us through like that first session and some of the things you are trying to find out?
So what we do, and honestly, I don't remember off the top of my head if this exactly matches up with the Gottman therapy, but it's pretty close. So what we do is we have people come in, and the way that we do it is we have each person, and it could be the person who called, or it could not be. It's kind of a judgment call, but sometimes what I'll say is like, so you know, Susie, we had a chance to talk on the phone for a minute, and so we talked just a little bit. So maybe I'll start with you today, John, and you know, we'll talk about what's it like for you to come in here, and you know, they'll talk about it a little bit, and then you go, you know, back to the other person, and probably say something along the lines of like, how can we help you? What did you have in mind for, you know, how this is going to go, and things like that. Then we move into what is called the oral history. Or wait, no, sorry. Then we move into the way that we do it is we move into the part where they talk about a problem, and so we give them a set amount of time. Usually about 7.5 or about 7 to 15 minutes, somewhere in there. And again, it depends on how much time you have. If you have a 90-minute appointment, which is what the Gottmans recommend, you may be able to go for, you know, 10 to 15 minutes. If it's an hour or something like that, we get them about 7. And so we just literally while they're talking, we say something to the effect of, so John and Susie, I want you both to talk to each other. All right. And while you are talking to each other, I'm not going to say a word. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just a fly on the wall. So what we want you to do is we want you to pick a problem, any problem you want, and we want you to talk about it for, you know, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you decide. And I will literally take my phone and start a timer, you know. And so once they, you know, a lot of times once they get started, you start to see the problems. You know, like I mean, depending on like, and again, while they're talking, you kind of think about like what's the topic, like what is it that they're talking about. You think about, you know, what's the tone that these people are talking to? Is somebody like, saying really demeaning things or things like that, or almost like a narcissistic kind of attitude, like I didn't do anything wrong ever. You're things like that can be serious and fall under the contempt category. But yeah, so if there's a high, I mean, they also pay attention to things like body language, so rolling your eyes. If people are rolling their eyes and just like absolutely looking disgusted, and I'm not talking about like looking annoyed. I mean, I guess there's one thing to be said, like if somebody kind of looks annoyed, but somebody really looks like they're just like appalled at what the person's saying. That's a bad sign. Um, if sometimes they will be literally doing the attack defend thing right in front of you. Sometimes they will be talking over each other, and it's just a mess. And so you basically just watch. I mean, we just watch. We don't. I mean, we let them kind of have at it for a little while. And then what we do is we say, okay, time's up. Thank you for doing that. That was great. Good job. That's very informative. That helps me out a lot. And then you say, we're going to shift gears now. And I want you guys to tell me, where did you guys meet? And almost immediately they go from being like, a lot of times they go from being like, puffed up and pissed off to being really like melt and kind of melts. You almost kind of watch it melt. So when they start to talk about that, a lot of times it makes them, I mean, just totally night and day, like almost like that. And so not all the time, but most of the time. So they talk about, you basically, they say, take a trip down memory lane. And the point of that is to help people kind of instill some hope, I guess you could say, like remind them, kind of refresh the idea that it wasn't always like this, that they had a lot of fun together, like the idea of like how they became attracted to each other, so fun questions, like it's kind of fun. And people love it. I mean, people will talk to you for as long as you want to talk to them about this for the most part. So, when did you have your first date? Who asked who out? How long did you guys date before you got married? Who proposed to who? What was the wedding planning like? What was the wedding like? Where'd you go on your honeymoon? Tell me about the decision to have kids, whatever. But basically, you talk about that kind of thing, and a lot of times they just love it, and that will pretty much take you through the hour, or at least that's how we do it. And so, but again, what you want is you want to listen to what are your hopes and goals, and then so in the first appointment, you also have to, I forgot to mention this, you also have to set the ground rules. Right. So the ground rules include the format, right? So we tell people, listen, so before we get started with this, and we're going to start in just a minute, but, I want you both to hear this. So, this is how we do things here. So we have it so that we're together today. Obviously, after today, I'm going to meet with one of you each time. For an hour or 90 minutes, or, I mean, again, ideally 90 minutes probably. And then after that, it's together forever. Another really important thing to make sure to mention in the beginning is that there's no such thing as secrets. So, meaning that like sometimes people will tell you, especially in the individual session, sometimes people will say like, listen, I want you to know this, but I don't want her to know this, that I've actually already filed for divorce. She doesn't know it yet. And they may say something like, I actually might even talk about that, but I don't want you to tell her, something like that. But the idea is that there's no, or sometimes they'll say like, look, she doesn't know it, but I've been having an affair. Like, I really like this person, whatever, but I don't want her to know that yet. So the idea is like, okay, well, we can't do that. I'm sorry. You could say again, the way that we do things here is that we have to talk about that. Like that's going to be really important, And so if they quit, and they may even, somebody might even call you later and say, why did you, cancel the appointment or whatever, and you say you'll have to take it up with whoever. But the idea is that like we don't keep secrets. Now, if somebody were to say something like, listen, she doesn't know this yet, but I want to talk about this. I've already filed papers or something like that. You might be maybe a little bit more flexible and say like, well, look, would you be willing to talk about that? I mean, we need to talk about that. We're going to be talking about that. And hopefully they are willing to do that, So yeah, there's no such thing as secrets. We talked a little bit about safety earlier. Hopefully nobody will say, it's very unlikely, I think, that somebody will say, especially in the beginning, there has been domestic violence. That tends to come out in the individual appointments. Yeah, I mean, that's typical. I mean, in the other practice that I do where we take health insurance, you can only do an hour appointment. So, that can cut into your time pretty good.
Okay. So, so then once you get into the individual sessions, is there a format that you follow, or is it just they just tell you what they want to tell you?
So in the individual sessions, sometimes I'll include some other things like we'll make a genogram or something, because again, like a lot of marriage therapy or attachment theory is based on the idea that a lot of people are either recreating something from their childhood or they're trying to escape something from their childhood. It usually falls into one of the two categories. That's not necessarily a Gottman method, but that's just something that I sometimes do. But basically what you're looking for is like perspective. How do you feel like things are going? Is there, I mean, do you feel like this can be helped? I might sneeze here, maybe not. Excuse me. Anyway, so thank you. So yeah, so you basically just talk to them, about what's their kind of view of the status of things, and
then
you also would probably ask them about safety.
Okay, and then at the session where they both come back, what is your MO there?
So when you see the assessment, it will actually print off strengths and weaknesses. Now, the Gottmans recommend to start off with the strengths, again, in the spirit of instilling hope. So you would say something like, look, so at this point, I've had a chance to look at your assessment. I've had a chance to watch the two of you together. We've had the chance to talk to each other. So we have a decent idea at this point about what are the strengths and what are the areas that are going to need to be worked on. And so, the strengths may be like, look, so you guys still really know what's going on in each other's lives. That's great. That is a strength. It says here that you guys, have some shared goals. I mean, that's great. I mean, that's really good. I mean, you both want to retire in a few years, and I know that you've worked hard for this for a long time. Whatever, and then you move towards the weaknesses, or like, well, we wouldn't say weaknesses, but well, I don't know, you might, I guess, but probably like, all right, so let's talk about what do we need to work on, and then you can give recommendations, oftentimes aligning with the things that were in the slideshow. So
Okay.
if contempt is present, that would be worked on first. If it's a criticism and defensiveness cycle, you might work on that. If they have no idea what's going on in each other's lives anymore, they barely see each other, you might work on that. It's if there's an affair, there's all sorts of things to kind of pick.
So, so in that first session, you're looking for those four horsemen. Is that right?
The four horsemen are things that create instability.
Yeah. So in that first session, you're looking for how they talk to each other, how they talk about each other, how they both their nonverbal and their verbal communication. What else are you looking for?
I like to pay attention to how they reference the marriage.
Okay.
That's an important piece. But again, I mean, I start lining it up to, is there, again, the 3A is like affairs, addiction, abuse, or if the four horsemen are present. And if one of the four horsemen is present, again, contempt is considered the most serious. So if contempt is present, we'll probably start there. Sometimes it's difficult to say if it's there or not. But I mean, again, if it's like they're constantly fighting, and a lot of times people say like, look, I don't know what the deal is. The past 6 months, we just can't seem to be in the same room with each other. We just, 6 months isn't that long. I mean, it's long, but it's not like, as far as the marriage goes, it's not that bad. And again, I guess it's subjective, but if somebody's like, if somebody says that we've been doing for the past 10 years, we can't, we can't even be around each other. When we're around each other, we just, fight like cats and dogs, things like that. That's a pretty serious amount of time.
Okay.
So that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Well, was there anything else before we go into the practice part Was there anything else that you think people should know?
No, not necessarily. I guess the last thing that I'll say is that like it might kind of surprise you what people will talk about. It's just a never-ending, possibilities. Um, I guess one thing kind of in that vein is that sometimes what people consider to be the problem or maybe just a symptom of the problem. So it starts becoming a judgment call to say like, listen, I hear you saying that, you don't feel appreciated, but I wonder if that's actually, more of this, or whatever. And so, people sometimes will give you their views, but it may fall under a bigger umbrella.
Can you give us an example?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I just said, so like if somebody said like, basically, I don't feel like this person knows what's going on in my life anymore. I don't feel like they say anything to me when they're at my house. I don't, or like when we're at home together, I don't feel like we could be in the same room and I may as well be a ghost. I may be, I do things for him and it just, that he doesn't notice anything. A lot of times what we do is like, we end up getting in arguments and, things like that. So that's a lot of stuff. But like, again, like what I would be interested in, what I'm almost always interested in is does this fall under the contempt category? And so if it falls under the contempt, like if the idea of being unappreciated or unacknowledged or invalidated or things like that, if this person seems like it just absolutely is starting to drive her crazy, that's a big problem. I'll give you another quick example. I had a lady in my office kind of recently who she and her husband had taken well, actually, I don't even know if they were married at the time, but they had taken about a month off. They had been having a rough patch and they separated for about a month. And during this month, this guy apparently saw an ex-girlfriend and insisted that nothing had happened, just like absolutely insisted that it had been relatively innocent. Like he said, they had dinner together, it looked bad, but like he insisted up and down that nothing had happened. She didn't believe him at all. And she didn't have proof, and the guy, whatever. So there's a lot of stuff in that too. So, I mean, there's trust issues, commitment issues. And then again, like, is this possibly rising to the point where this person cannot get past this? Like, is this actually, so, and actually in this case, I talked to her, it's like, so what's it going to take for you to either believe him or kind of move past this? And she kind of thought about it for a while. She's like, look, honestly, I think I do believe him, but she's like, I'm still angry about it, but I think I do believe him. So we were kind of able to say like, okay, well, look, and that if you feel like you do believe him and you really feel that in like a deep way, we gotta kind of start moving past that and working on like, okay, what do we do in the spirit of either processing this or moving forward or whatever. But again, if she had said like, look, I just don't think I'm ever going to get past this, that's a much more serious problem. So if it was a ladder, then if it's a trust issue, that's one thing. If it falls under the idea of contempt, that's a whole other thing.
Okay. So thank you so much, Will, for coming and chatting with us.
Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it did. And I'm just going to leave people with an idea of what's going to happen when we all get together. Will is going to kind of coach us as we practice in front of him and in front of the group. So we'll have one person playing the therapist and two people playing a couple. And we'll kind of go through a first session, and Will may stop us in the middle and ask us questions, ask the therapist questions, or maybe give notes, and we'll be able to go through a couple of those scenarios in an hour, probably about 4 is what I'm thinking, hopefully more. But so please come back on that day. That's going to be the 21st at 11 a.m. and August. All right, thanks so much, Will.
See you then.
All right.
Bye.